Gideon, what's your sense of how the Russia-Ukraine war shapes up from here? In the past few days, Ukraine's been claiming some successes in its counter-offensive. We've seen some drone attacks in Russia as well. There's been a change in the defense ministry. From where things are, where do you see this war go?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that, this war, like all wars, is very unpredictable, and there have been several things that weren't anticipated. The complete failure initially of Russia's assault on Kiev, then things like the fall of Kharkiv. And now I think that the Ukrainians, up until now, have certainly done slightly worse than the West had hoped in this counteroffensive. But, this was the most trailed counteroffensive that I can ever remember. It was for months that they were saying they were going to attack as they built up their forces. And that, unfortunately, gave the Russians the chance to build these formidable minefields, which are taking many lives as we speak. It does sound like the Ukrainians have made a small breakthrough, but the conventional wisdom, I think, is that unless there's another surprise, then that's not going to turn into a sort of sudden Russian collapse, which allows the Ukrainians to get to the Sea of Azov, which is their goal, very quickly. So I think people are now looking ahead to another year of fighting, and the question is, which side has the greater endurance? I mean, I think my concern is that Russians have greater resources in terms of manpower, the state of their economy. It's not great, but unlike the Ukrainians, they're not completely reliant on budgetary support from outside. And of course, the Ukrainians have this question mark over what happens in the American election. Is there this sort of sword of Damocles of the Donald Trump victory that might lead to a cutoff in Western aid? But it's not all negative. I mean, the West has been slow actually in making its mind up about giving Ukraine things. So they're still getting stuff that's been promised. The advanced fighter planes are not yet deployed, and they will be in the next fighting season, and that could make a real difference. I think that we'll probably get to a position where Ukraine will have more artillery shells and so on, and they are determined to keep fighting as far as one can tell. So I'm afraid it looks like another year of bloodshed ahead.
Martin, the Russian economy so far has held together better than most analysts expected when the sanctions were imposed. Is that the way you think it will stay, that they've been able to find ways around the sanctions and keep the economy going, even if it's not firing on all cylinders, but it's not coming apart in the way one may have imagined?
Well, actually, I'm not surprised by this. I wrote a column rather soon after the war fought in which I discussed the history of sanctions. And I pointed out that, in general, the history of sanctions is a history of disappointment. It's very, very difficult to break an economy by sanctions, and that's true of much weaker ones. Iraq under Saddam is one of many, many examples. Since Russia has huge natural resources, which it can continue to sell, it can earn money, either through bilateral payment systems or even in hard currency, and it can buy stuff. The people who believe the sanctions are working argue, and I can't comment on this, I just don't have the expertise, Gideon may, that they are preventing them from getting high quality materials needed for munitions. The sort of technology that they need to import in order to sustain a high-quality armed forces are very significantly constrained. But the fact that the Russian economy can continue to produce stuff, that it can continue to sell stuff abroad, for instance, to India, for example, and as a result can continue to import the stuff it needs to survive, along with the fact that obviously it's a huge economy with huge resources, that therefore that it can survive sanctions seems to me completely unsurprising. It's one of the non-surprises, and this war will not be settled by the direct effect on the economy of the sanctions, so it might be affected by its impact on the quality of the Russian armed forces. My own worry throughout has been this would end as a very prolonged stalemate. And at the moment, at least to me, that looks like what's happening.
Last question, Gideon Rahman, about the US elections and what do you actually see happen? No one knows for sure, but given everything that you're seeing, reading, the dots that you're joining, where do you think we may end up?
Look, I mean, every American election seems extraordinary, but this one is more extraordinary than any I can remember. I mean, not least because of the strong possibility that Trump will be convicted of some of the charges facing him, particularly the federal charges relating to January the 6th, during the course of the campaign. So you have the possibility that one of the candidates will win the Republican nomination and then be sent to prison and be campaigning from prison. I mean, it sounds like a sort of a mini-series that would be rejected for improbability, but that is actually possible. But I mean, I think that the thing that would concern, certainly me and the Biden White House is that despite all of this, not only has Trump got pretty much a lock on the Republican nomination, but he's neck and neck with Biden. And given the American Electoral College system and its inbuilt bias towards the Republicans, I think it's entirely conceivable that Donald Trump will win the presidency, this time next year.
And Martin Wolf, if that were to happen, if you were looking into your economic crystal ball, what do you think that means for the global economy? Trump as president again?
Well, I'll just make two comments. First, three. I agree with Gideon. I think this reflects, in my view, a very profound breakdown of the US constitutional and political order, which is, to my mind, quite simply the most important thing happening in the world right now by several orders of magnitude. And third, if it happens, we're living in a different world. We're living in a different world in America. It won't be like the first Trump administration. It'll be very, very different. And I think it will reshape the global political and the economic order in entirely unpredictable ways. We could have a long discussion what some of those will be, but to me, this is now emerging as one of the great historical moments.